The idea of really understanding organizational culture in the context of organizational change. It's just a fascinating topic. You talk about that idea of organizational culture and transformation and change. You actually had an article, and I believe it was titled Organizational Culture and Its Impact on Transformational Change. Yeah, and we will share that link to that article in our show notes, of course. But you mentioned that organizational culture can either facilitate or hinder change efforts. How can organizations identify and address cultural barriers to change? And does it have something to do with this idea that you just spoke of with frame of reference?
It does. So to answer your question, let me offer a bit of context. We found that culture is only one of several inhibitors to any change. There has to be clarity of intent of the change, and that has to be cascaded throughout the organization. If you don't have that clear intent, then that's a risk. You've got to have synergistic teams operating, or you're at risk. So there's several risk factors, and culture is one of those. Meaning that if you start with the assumption, which I do, that whatever the initiative that the leaders have determined they want to execute, I start with the assumption that that's the right thing to do. I'm not a resource to help them evaluate if they're making the right move or not. I'm looking at what can get in your way. And so there's several of these inhibitors that can minimize, if not completely stop, movement in the direction that you want. And that's where culture comes important. Now, I should offer this caveat for your listeners. All of my work, all of this research is around major change relationship to culture. There are some of the things that I'll share as we talk, Jack, either might be less true or maybe not true at all if you were looking at incremental change. What I mean by major dramatic change is some type of initiative. It doesn't matter what the content is, but the initiative has to meet three criteria to be a major change. First, it has to be transformational in nature rather than incremental. Secondly, success is going to be measured on realization metrics, not installation metrics. A classic installation metric is how many people did we train? And if we intended to train 100 people and we did, we'll declare success. Realization metric is of those people that were trained, how many went out and not only applied what they were trained in, but accomplished what the training was for. That's a realization metric. So it's a much more sophisticated, demanding change if you're going to hold yourself accountable to realization outcomes. And the third variable is this initiative a good idea and we hope it works, or is it an absolute imperative, on my watch, this thing has to happen? So when I share any perspective today, Jack, about culture, it's culture's relationship to major transformational change. Nothing short of full realization is acceptable, and it's an absolute imperative. With that kind of urgency, then you've got a different relationship with culture. Does that raise any questions for you, Jack?
Oh, no. Yeah, absolutely. That's a great explanation. I appreciate it. And, when you look into the world of mergers and acquisitions and carve-outs, which you and I are both in and experienced in, I would certainly, based on your definition of major change, transformation, number one, number two, realization versus installation metrics, and is the initiative a good idea or is it imperative? I think that in most cases, in our work anyways, we would qualify for major change.
No, I would agree with you in general, and yet with a lot of the mergers and acquisitions that I've seen, yes, it's generally transformational. That's true. It almost always is considered an imperative. But Jack, a lot of the organizations that I've had access to, they tend to lean toward installation metrics rather than realization metrics.
Tell me more.
It's easier. It's easier to say, well, did we reorganize or did we lean out the workforce? Those are installation metrics. Yeah. It's a much harder task to create a dashboard around what were those things supposed to accomplish, and did they?
Yes.
So anyway, that's just a bit of a sideline that I've seen in mergers and acquisitions. Sometimes that one is a little short.
Yeah, I got you. Yes, agreed. And I think that you're probably right. That probably is a topic for another half-hour conversation in its own. I think there's a lot there. Well, Daryl, can you, if you don't mind, and maybe even keeping it confidential or anonymous, can you share any sort of an example of an organization that was successfully transformed its culture to drive change based on your major change criteria?
Well, it'll be important to be kind of generic in the discussion, so
Sure.
to protect confidentiality. But over the last few years, I've been particularly impressed with, for example, we worked with a pharma. Well, I put it in the pharma category. It's maybe more of a biotech. What was critical for them culturally? Let me back up. So they had a set of initiatives, Jack, that they didn't start off with needing to change their culture.
Mm,
When we did an analysis of what's going to get in your way, we were able to tell them your current culture is inconsistent with the culture you need to make this thing work.
mm,
So that's how they got into culture. They didn't just wake up one day deciding to change the culture. And when we dug into what was it about the culture that had to shift, there was several factors, but what I remember that jumped out at me was risk taking.
mm.
In that sector, there's so much caution, and understandably so. They've got patients' lives at stake. There's so much caution, however, that innovation was actually suffering because there wasn't enough risk taking. And shifting a culture that would go to the nth degree to make sure there was never any risk for patients. The challenge of how do we maintain that integrity and open up to being more innovative. I have a lot of respect for the leaders that saw the nuance of that and saw the answer isn't binary. It's not this way or that way. It's how do you blend the two ends of that
Yeah.
continuum. That one always kind of sticks out. I mean, there was a big box, one of the big box places that we all shop to. And for them, it was all about technology. They needed to update is not even really an accurate term. It was a dramatic leap forward technically, technology wise, in terms of the customer interface and the customer relation. And yet that was a huge leap forward. It wasn't just bringing in technology. They had to completely shift the mindset
Mm.
about how you relate to customers. And one of these big boxes is not too far from our house, and my wife and I shop there. And I couldn't help myself. About 18 months into this project, I was in there shopping, and there's now store signage up on the walls around this new thing. And so, of course, the person waiting on me doesn't know that I have lunch with his CEO, right? So, but I'm just a customer. So I said, "Hey, what is that about?" And what was amazing, and that what I was able to go back and tell the CEO was, I was there 18 months ago when they first started this thing, and part of it was how do we embed this down into the culture so that the person on the floor answering a question would be able to leverage this technology. Well, there I was asking a dumb customer question, and I got an impeccable answer. I mean, this guy
Oh,
just
wow.
nailed it.
Wow.
And he's probably, Jack, he's 12, 15 layers below the CEO,
Yeah.
right? That's when you know that we've got not just a technical answer here. We've got mindsets that have
Yeah.
shifted, and that one will probably always stick out for me.
What a great example, great story. And, when you get to that level, Daryl, I mean, talk about effective change, right? When you start changing the mindset and the hearts of the people, that's pretty powerful. That's a great story.